So very brief intro. My name is Ariel Upton. I am our head of growth here at Route 16. That means I focus on sales, marketing strategy. I have worked in and out of the Dynamics space, the Microsoft ecosystem for the last 10 years. And today I'm very happy to be joined by two of our co-founders and principals here at Route 16, Brendan Landers and Corey O'Brien. So who are we? Who is Route 16? Route 16 is a boutique consulting firm, and what we do is we help our customers, the people that work there, the companies that they work for, we help them change the way they work for the better. This is 100% what our team is focused on. It's 100% what we do, and we build these solutions and solve these problems in partnership with Microsoft, specifically the Dynamics and Power Platform suite of products. So that's Dynamic Sales, Dynamic Service, Customer Insights, Data and Journeys, and of course, the Power Platform. So before I turn it over, if you have any questions, if any of the topics we discussed today resonate with you, if you'd like to connect further, please feel free to reach out to myself, Brendan, Corey on LinkedIn, or connect with us at route16.com. And with that, I will turn it over to Brendan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Brendan Landers. I'm one of the principals, co-founders here at Route 16. I have been implementing these types of projects, so CRM implementations and more recently Power Platform, Power App implementations for roughly 20 years, 19 to be exact. Looking forward to saying 20 next year. In a variety of roles. So started as a project manager, business analyst role, moved into sort of functional architect roles, and then sort of engagement manager, director roles over the years. I have experience across industries, geographies, even cross platforms. As I've led Salesforce.com teams in the past. I often joke that I once dated the devil, but it was never that serious, as I always had ties to the Microsoft stack. So look forward to sharing a bit with you guys today, and we'll turn it over to Corey next.
Great. Hello, Corey O'Brien, also one of the co-founders here. I'm kind of the new guy to the platform. I've got about 4 months less experience than Brendan working with the platform. So it's, still 19-ish years, but he's got 19 years, 4 months probably. But my background is more technical, right? So I'm doing systems integrations, custom applications, custom APIs, those types of things. And really you're having Brendan and I both talk to this today. That's kind of going to be the theme throughout this. So you'll be kind of hearing the two sides of a successful migration project, as Brendan's going to cover kind of the business needs and functional side of the house, and I'll be covering the technical concerns and considerations you should keep in mind as you go through it. Great, and then I'll just do a quick buzz through of what we're going to be covering today. So we'll have the first steps of when you approach a migration project. What should you be thinking of? What do you want to be asking before you begin any kind of migration project? And then what are some of the different approaches or strategies you can take, again, both from the technical and the business side? At the heart of any platform migration is going to be data. And we'll talk through things that you might want to do when you get an opportunity as part of a migration project. So we'll talk about what you might want to do with your data at that kind of key milestone. And then what does success look like? What's the clear path to success, again, from both sides, technical and business? And what are things to avoid? What are pitfalls we've run into? What are things we've seen make a migration go sideways? And then, finally, what are some tools that you can use, that you can lean on to help make your migration go more smoothly? And if time provided, we'll take some questions at the end of the presentation as well. All right, so this is kind of the overall considerations. What are the makings of a successful migration? So any project, right, has the key constraints of time, resources, and budget, where you've got those constraints that you're working with, and that's going to be a factor here as well. So, but moving beyond those basics, what are the things that will determine whether or not your migration project is successful? So typically, the drivers for this are you're looking for overall cost savings, right? Perhaps moving to a more modern platform, more efficiencies, more out-of-the-box functionality that will save you maintenance cost, that will provide reduce the effort that your team has to put into delivering sales functionality, You're looking for those cost savings, possibly license reduction, right? If depending on what platform you're moving from. Trying to get rid of technical debt. Some of these migrations are moving from old on-premise systems, right? That are out of date, or maybe have limited capabilities, and you're trying to move on to a more modern platform that will serve you going forward. One big thing is, when a migration occurs, everybody has the same expectation that it's going to be a small amount of downtime and that it should be seamless for the end user. There's obviously going to be some training involved. They might have to go to a different endpoint. They might have a different, user experience, but that's not something that should disrupt their actual productivity and work. So it's got to be something that they're well prepared for, that will get them through that. And then user adoption improvement. A lot of times people are moving from old platforms where user adoption has died off. They haven't motivated people to use it. They're not seeing what they need to. So by moving to a new platform, they're hoping to see an improvement in user adoption, and that should be something measurable that they can have going forward. And then this is what we'll be talking about the rest of this. Alignment between business leadership and technical leadership. It's key to get that out of the gate. What does success look like from both sides of the house, so that you can measure at the end of the migration, did we achieve those things? And if either of these sides dominate that, and it's only business leadership that's driving the project or only technical leadership, it's usually an unsuccessful migration. You really need that to be a hand-in-hand operation. And then,
So next,
Brendan, I was going to say, you want to jump in and cover the business half first?
Yeah, you got it. So yeah, just talking about some high level considerations. I'll touch on the business side. Corey will take the technical side, and that's going to be the theme today, as Corey mentioned. But and a lot of this is somewhat obvious, but you'd be surprised at how often people skip some of these things or don't consider some of these things. So firstly, think about what you're trying to achieve, right? What's a desired outcome? Make sure everyone is aware of the goals and objectives, right? We're not just doing a project. Doing a project doesn't work. Measure twice, cut once, right? I'm guessing I'll say this again at some point in the next 45 minutes because I say it often, but really, really important. Again, people, jump in too fast and then figure out what they're doing along the way, and that's a recipe for disaster from my perspective. So, without sort of the measure twice, cut once, you're going to struggle to find success. Secondly, when does this need to be completed? What's the timing? Are there any pressing dates, right? Very important. Sometimes there's license expirations that we need to be contemplating along the way. Who's available to work on it, right? How much internal versus external support do you need? Self-serving, of course, but we'd recommend at least some time from a third party that's seen hundreds of these implementations, right, in order to ensure success. But that's up to you. It can be successful either way. Next, who's aware that this is coming? How are you going to socialize it? You need to engage in non-technical folks to have a hope of success, right? They need to be aware. And along those lines, what's the plan for adoption, organizational change management? It doesn't just happen. You have to give that thought at the onset, if you want success. Is the management team on board and engaged? Again, another OCM component, but are they sharing excitement of why this is going to be great? Or are they just nodding their heads and kind of, have mediocre kind of reaction? That's a really good indicator of success. If the management team's on board and engaged, and that's on leadership to make that happen, and to kind of show the value and why, but it's really, really important. And then lastly, quite simply, what are the risks? Are there any contingency plans needed? I mentioned the license expiration thing earlier, right? You don't want to go live the day before your licenses expire on your legacy platform. You want to be a little thoughtful about things like that. So that's kind of the business side.
Yeah, and when I'm coming into one of these projects, I'm heads down in this right column, and I'm really relieved that there's somebody else that's focusing on that left column, right? So for me, like, the data integrity obviously needs to be there. You can't have a loss in confidence as you bring data over, and I think that there's a lot of extra level, like one more level of questions around that data integrity, right? You've got to look at things like there's some nuance, like date times, like time zone specific things, right? That as you bring them over, there might be some translation that needs to occur. Integrations are one of the key things that we typically start with a whiteboard conversation about your current system, what's integrating with it, what's passing data in and out. That'll all need to be taken into consideration as you move to another platform, right? Those integrations need to be updated or replaced possibly. Tool selection. This is an interesting one too, where when we talk about tool selection, we're usually trying to find something that is a good fit for the client. Perhaps they already have licenses for it. Perhaps they have team members that can contribute towards the migration, right? So we're trying to find things that are a good fit for the particular migration, as well as things that we can come to the table with recommendations for if there's no prevailing opinion. Testing and validation. So we'll talk about this more in additional slides, right? But there's multiple levels of testing, and it needs to happen both from an end user point of view, somebody looking at the application, and from a data point of view. So after data is migrated, somebody's digging into basically the database level of both sides and making sure row counts match and things like that to make sure that we got complete coverage on the migration. Backup and recovery. A big part of the plan is, these migrations. I don't remember one where we've had to actually like punt and like, let's try again in the next window, like this weekend is a failure. But you have to have a plan to roll back, right? So if you get into the 18th hour and you only have 24 hours to go, you don't want to start figuring out how to reverse things at that point. So you've got to have a panic button that you can hit and that you feel good that you can get back to a place where everybody can continue working Monday, even if they're in the old system. So that's a good plan to have. And then just future state, going forward, the audit requirements is really about if you're leaving any data behind, but you've got business requirements that say like, I need to be able to go and look at like who created this record, even if it was created 5 years ago, just take into account that even if all the data is not coming over, you might want to put a snapshot of the old system on the shelf somewhere to help solve some of those audit requirements future facing. Okay, so on the technical strategies, there's a lot of variation here, but they kind of tend to fall into one of two buckets for us. So Big Bang, ironically named Big Bang because it works best for smaller migrations, is we're going to move the whole system at once. So the advantage here is that like there's no lingering process. It makes the integration migration easier, right? Like we're only integrating with one of these two platforms at any given moment in time. The entire user base, maybe they leave Friday working with one system, they come back in Monday, they're working on the next system. If the data fits within that and it's reasonable, Big Bang is probably the right approach, just because of it's a little bit simpler. And I'll say Big Bang, but typically we're not actually, we're trying to preload data if we can. So we'll run migrations to that new environment for the weeks leading up to it, and then we'll just bring a delta of changes over on the actual go live window, which keeps that window smaller, which is the goal. More often than not, though, Big Bang is the most systems we're migrating are too big, and it would be too much risk to put that all in one shot over one migration window. So we reach for a segmented solution. In this case, we're not moving the whole system at once, just subsets of it. So we will look at segments of how we can chop up the data. So that might be by client, that might be by region or business unit, right? But we're looking to take pieces of the data over one weekend or one downtime period at a time. One really nice thing about this approach is that if you've got some segments are much bigger than others, you can start with a small segment and they can be your pilot group working with a new platform. And really how frequently you follow with the additional segments is up to you. So if you've got, you want to let 3 weeks go by before you follow with the second segment, you can use that to work out some of the kinks. Some of the downside of this is that your integrations, you probably have a little more complexity. Those old integrations on the old system, they either need to be updated to look, stop looking at the segments that are no longer active there, or you need to replace. One of the things we've done recently on a big migration was the first thing we did was we replaced the integrations, and the integrations were capable of talking to the old system and the new, and kind of a mix of both. So we did the integration update first, and it was all on the old system, and then we started bringing segments of data over to the new platform, and that allowed us to move more seamlessly without as much risk. But both are valid, very valid approaches. It really kind of just depends on sizing the two to figure out which one's the right fit for you.
And then from a business perspective, right, the strategies we often think about are, is this going to be a lift and shift? Or is this more of a technical sort of upgrade, if you will? Or is this going to be modernization? And there's valid reasons for both. I would say lift and shift is less fun, frankly. It feels more of it like an upgrade than a relaunch. And the way I look at it is, if you were to move to a new house, right, would you want to put everything in the same spot, same furniture setup, same garage organization, put your knives and forks in the same spot? Or, further, if you were to build a new house, right, would you make it the same? Would anyone really recreate what they have today? Possible, but unlikely, right? Why? Things can be better. Time changes needs, right? Kids move out, priorities change. You realize that last house wasn't perfect. And most importantly, you have a great opportunity to make things better, to fix things, right? To love it more. So do that. In the short term, it might cost a little bit more, may stretch timeline a little bit, but generally it's less daunting than most people think. And frankly, adoption is really tough with lift and shift projects. If nothing's better or different, but they have to learn a new system, that stinks, right? Moving sucks if it's just a move, right? If there's no excitement attached to it, it kind of stinks. So we push modernization unless the goal is fast and cheap, and sometimes there's reasons for that. We have a compelling date or something, but unless the goal is fast and cheap, make it better. Give people a reason to be excited. Fix what's broken. Retire what's no longer relevant, right? And more than anything, and I think this is one of the most important things when thinking about successful systems. Make sure people get more out of it than they have to put into it. I think that's really important. Make sure they get more out of it than they have to put into it. Moving along. All right. So next we're going to shift gears a little bit to data quality. So I feel like this is everybody's favorite topic, data quality. It's becoming even more important in this sort of AI age that we hear about every day, right? Data is currency at this point. And having good, accurate, clean data is really, really important. So, some super high level do's and don'ts. We'll drill in a little bit after this, but, define clear business rules and standards around data, right? I'll talk about governance more in a minute. Identify your critical data elements essential to CRM success, right? Plan for integration. Corey hit on integration. People want to see everything in one place. Plan for integration with other systems, external data sources, maybe enrich your data. Give people a full picture. Set measurable KPIs to monitor data quality consistently. I find this happens a lot where we care about data quality at the initial launch and then we kind of forget about it. And then sort of lastly, circling back to governance, one of the things that I see come up quite often is sort of a lack of ownership around data. So there's some topics here that you have to work through with your organization, right? Who owns the data? Is it the IT team or is it business team? From my perspective, the business has to. IT can support it, but this is like a topic where it takes two to tango. Think about things like how often are we reviewing the data? If you only plan to clean it for go live, as I mentioned a minute ago, you're going to have messy data within just weeks. I think I read a stat years ago where data degrades at 2% a month. So think of that over time exponentially, really, really bad. And it's a living, breathing problem, right? So my take is some percentage of someone's job should be managing data quality. Tools can help, data enrichment tools, AI can help, but human intervention is still required for most, I would say, not for all, but for most. So I think that's really, really important. And then next, we're going to talk about, just four kind of how I view data quality. There's sort of four key elements to data quality that I like to talk about. This is a topic I enjoy talking about. And so, typically I find when people talk data quality, they think about one thing. They think about duplicate data, or we have too much, we have stuff that's no longer relevant, we have duplicate data. The reality is, from my perspective, you need to think about it more broadly. So yes, is data accuracy important? Of course. How correct is the data? It's super important. But also things like how consistent is the data across systems? Meaning, if I'm looking in two different systems at similar data, am I getting the same answer? If I look at a report and I look at my CRM system, is it telling me two different things? If so, that's a problem, right? How equivalent is your data? Third, completeness. It's great that you have fields to capture data, but how complete is your data? I look at I always use the LinkedIn approach. LinkedIn tells you your profile is 90% complete. Think about that with key data elements. What's the level of completeness? And if it's real small, unless there's a niche reason, you probably don't need the field. And lastly, and Corey's going to touch on this on the next slide as well, is relevancy. Great, you have good, clean data. We've passed all those hurdles, but is it relevant to the users? Does it matter? Oftentimes, I see people put too much stuff in up front because they think it's the only chance they have. And I'll talk about that more a little bit later as well. So passing it to Corey here to talk a little bit about the relevancy and data trimming topic.
Yeah, so one of the things, again, this is a great opportunity when you're switching platforms to do a little spring cleaning. So the obvious things I think are looking at like tables and columns that are no longer relevant, right? If there are things that are not being used, like they really just shouldn't even exist in the new system. Don't create a space for them. Keep the schema as clean as possible. But beyond that, if you're looking at how much data you want at people's fingertips, see if there's any tables that you have an opportunity to have a cutoff date, basically, where it's like, I don't want anything older than 3 years, on our historical opportunities or something like that, right? There are going to be different tables where you need to have everything, and some where you can make opportunities to leave old things behind that are just going to clog up the system, impact your performance and reporting and your usage, honestly, on the cloud-based platforms for capacity. Kind of continuing on that path, binary data, a lot of times people have collected a huge pile of binary data. And by binary data, I mean like images on email attachments, right? Or files, things that they're not really actively using or even treating this system as the system of record for it. But it's just been collected because they're automatically tracking emails in Outlook, right? And that's flowing into their CRM platform. So look at things like that and think like, well, we'd like to know that an email took place and that, what it said in the body and the subject, but maybe we can leave all the attachments off of it. We don't need to bring that over as we bring the system. And then audit data is a special case where if the system you're migrating from has a kind of change tracking of who changed which fields on what time, that data can be particularly difficult to import into new systems because those don't typically have an API that will allow you to create audit records because they don't want you to create fake audit records. So have an answer for that, right? If you can't bring audit data with you, that might be the kind of thing that you want to have a trail like that gets exported and put into a separate database that's just on the shelf if you ever need it. And following that thought, you might want to have a more full backup, at least for some window of time of the old platform, that even the stuff you're trimming, you put it in that full backup that you keep on the shelf as your just in case. If your old licenses expire and you lose access to the old system, consider just having a full backup that you stick on the shelf for a couple of years, just in case.
So switching gears a bit to just kind of overall best practices, we'll drill into these further in future slides here. But a few tidbits that, from my perspective, are like must-haves in terms of best practices or leading practices. And so the first and probably most important one is nailing the core use cases. So this is kind of Pareto type stuff where 80% of the effort the users will go through, 80% of the system they will touch is probably 20% of the use cases. So that's where the time and energy should be spent, right? If you have 30 use cases, there's probably less than 5 that are mission critical where the user is spending the bulk of their time. That's where we should spend our time. That's where you want to consider customization over configuration, if it makes sense, right? If it really helps the user. So make sure you understand and nail those core use cases. We talked about data a minute ago, so I always say overestimate the data migration. That's not necessarily hands-on keyboard time of saying move, field X over to field Y type thing. That's really the whole process, start to finish. So the mapping exercise, understanding data types and the impacts that have, ultimately testing, which is probably the most important piece. The data migration tends to be one of the most complicated parts of the project and goes a long way in terms of adoption, right? If you turn the system on and people don't see what they expect to see, it's a real uphill battle of winning adoption back. Next, add value with integration. We've touched on integration a couple of times. Almost all of I'd say 75% of our projects have some level of integration. Again, these are enhancements for the users and to make sure users have the picture they need in the CRM system. And then lastly, consider how users work. I've seen this a number of times where we build everything for a multi-monitor environment for users who are on the road, right? Consider how users work. Might be mobile, might be laptop screen, might be sitting at a desk, with multiple monitors. You have to think about that because it influences how design and ultimately how we implement. So next, we'll dive into, just from a business side, some deeper considerations for success, or sort of, again, best practices we see. So first, create a charter. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but what are you trying to do, right? What are the guiding principles? Use this as kind of the North Star along the way. This should not be a moving target. If it is, your chances of success are very low. So sometimes projects take 4 months, 6 months, 8 months. And sometimes people forget over time what the charter was. What were we trying to accomplish? And I always joke, it's sort of, when I go through a drive-through and I make an order, when I get the bag, I look in the bag and did I get what I ordered, right? That's how I consider kind of the charter, the intent of the charter. Next, document the process, especially for the core use cases, right? This gives you a chance to improve process, which I think is pretty important, but also it's helpful throughout the project. You're going to have people that don't understand the business that are involved in the project. And if they don't understand the business and they don't have access to the process, and it makes their job harder, frankly. It's good to have as well. Next, ensure people understand the value, right? One thing to communicate it, but make sure they understand it. This is OCM 101, right? Change Management 101. Why are we doing this? How does it help the organization? How does it help my team? How does it help me? You need to have answers to all of those questions. That goes a long way towards adoption, right? Next, follow a process, right? A software development lifecycle. Be iterative in your own way. Like, we really believe in being iterative. It doesn't have to be true agile, but be iterative. Have the core team kick every tire possible along the way, right? Take testing serious. That's another huge mistake people make is, we'll figure it out when we turn the lights on. Tends to not go very well. Next, keep it simple but meaningful, right? We believe in crawl, walk, run. Customize where it makes sense, but only where it makes sense. Next, training. I mean, I think this is kind of table stakes, but really that doesn't mean like train 2 weeks before you go live and then never train again. Train once, train again down the road, right? There should be refreshers along the way. The system evolves. People forget, and people are afraid to ask for help, frankly, especially if they see others around them not needing help. They end up just saying, this system stinks, that sort of thing. So, and find power users to help with this. Find, fans in the crowd. There are always fans in the crowd. Find fans on the crowd to help with training. And then lastly, reward good behavior, right? People are competitive. We prefer the carrot approach over the stick approach, and there's simple ways to reward, right? You can do very basic things the first 30, 60, 90 days of a go live to reward usage, reward good behavior. They don't cost a lot, but we see it impacts adoption, frankly. So Corey will talk about the technical side next.
Yeah, and this again, the detailed data map. I think everybody has a data map. I think what really separates a successful from a failure is the level of detail you get into on there. Because anytime that you start to make hand waves and you're like, oh, bring this old table over exactly as it is, right? That it's worth going and spelling out the field level definition, because somebody's going to go build the actual transformation. Somebody's going to go test it. Anything that you kind of glaze over is like, it's not worth our time to like spell it out. There's room for misinterpretation or missed requirements there. It's also important when you're building that data map to think about things like, well, we probably have a concept of users from the old system, and we have historical data. So there are users that are no longer with the organization. What happens when we try and bring the records they used to own or they were the creator of, right? And we want to remember they created it, but they're not here anymore. Do we want to create users for them and just disable them in the new system? Do we want to have some placeholder user that represents all old users and just maybe find a new field to put the stamp of the legacy owner? Those are things that you need to think through where not all data will necessarily make sense in the new system, especially around things that are no longer relevant currently. Predictable performance is key, especially, I feel like so much of the technical piece there's accuracy, but then there's also hitting those windows, whatever your downtime windows are, and being able to predict that if we need to move 1,000,000 rows, we're going to need at least 3 hours. And the way that you get predictable performance is by doing test runs and doing it with different size segments of data, so that you've got a pretty accurate estimate of how long it's going to take you, and what you can get done in the amount of time you have when users are not in the system. Centralized logging is a key thing for making sure everybody's got visibility. So I would say earlier in our history, like we would run migrations, and the person that was running it had it running on their laptop, and they could come check in on it and give everybody an output of like, hey, we're running a little behind. What we found is like that doesn't make any sense. Don't have that single point of failure. With centralized logging, anybody on the project team that's got access can go see what's the progress. Are we getting errors? How are we progressing? How are we tracking towards the end of the migration? Testing front and back, I mentioned a little bit before. So you want to test the front end, the user experience, make sure the data looks, screen by screen like old and new system, that you're getting parity there. But you also want to go at the back end and run some aggregate queries and sums and things like that, just to test and make sure that everything's adding up to what you would expect it to be based on the data map again. And then the go live checklist. So this one's less about end users and change management, and it's more about the technical team and what they're doing during the migration. There's probably some prerequisite steps, things they can start setting up a week before the first migration window. And then there's other things that are like, oh, make sure that we disable the accounts in the old system after the migration's done, right? Or go ahead and do this smoke testing plan after the migration completes before we tell users they're good to go and they can get back into the system. So that's something that, like, as you kind of go through, especially if you're doing a segmented approach where you're doing different segments over different weekends, you'll catch things and start to refine this checklist and add steps to it to make each future segment smoother. Go live weekend, go into it with a plan. Typically, you'll have like certain checkpoint meetings where the team will plan on like getting together. You might have some more asynchronous communication via email or Teams messages, just to kind of check in and be like, oh, we're only 50% through, but we're 75% through our time. Anybody else getting worried? Should we meet and talk about it? But plan on having a few scheduled checkpoints beforehand, and then have certain people assigned to keep an eye on it and kind of reporting asynchronously to the rest of the team as well. And then hypercare support. Once the migration's done, the users are given the go live, have a plan in place where you've got some office hours, you've got some support for the people that weren't paying attention during training. You've got, if something's not behaving, you need to react quickly. You've got one chance at the first impression on the new platform, and being hyper aware and ready to jump in and fix issues quickly will help keep those first impressions positive.
All right, so next we're going to touch on some common pitfalls, and Corey and I will share this slide as well. But some things we see kind of on repeat that are common pitfalls, or first is over-engineering the system. Kind of touched on this before, but for whatever reason, people still feel like they only have one shot to launch a project, so they quite often try to jam everything in, right? We need 1,000 fields on the opportunity form, right? Most of which end up being unnecessary. We need something heavily customized that we only do one day a month for 3 hours. Things like that. Don't do it. We believe customize where is needed, where the use cases are most impactful. But ultimately, crawl before walking and walk before speed walking or jogging and running and flying and all that good stuff, right? Next is neglecting key phases. So spend time up front to nail the requirements, prioritization. I'll touch on this more in a minute. The time up front in user acceptance testing is the two areas I see people most often sort of neglect. I caution you on that, right? And the third area I'd say people neglect sometimes is hypercare. So you sort of need to be all hands on deck for a period of time after go live, just to help adoption, frankly. If people don't know what they're doing, sometimes they'll blame the system. And if you're not there to help them through it, or someone's not there to help them through it, it sort of only exacerbates the problem. Next is misaligned expectations. Corey kind of hit on this at the beginning, right? And it's too unclear as to what the goals are, the why, right? And business and IT team not on the same page, common pitfall. And then lastly, also incredibly important, not involving users in the process. Today's day and age, users need to at a minimum feel represented. Yet to see a successful project where IT does this in a vacuum, for example. So for IT folks, and I consider myself IT, you don't know what they need, right? You have an idea, you probably have a damn good idea, but even if you do, no one wants a system jammed down their throat, right? So make sure users involved. You can generally get to the same result, but have higher adoption if you're including users in the process. And the last thing, I touch on this a lot, but users' expectations have changed and they've elevated, quite frankly. I blame phones for this, but users have a different set of expectations for the apps they use. System can't be mediocre. There was a time where people, well, it was a green screen system. I know the keyboard layout. I know what to do. Those days are in the past, as far as I know. So those are the business side.
Yeah, and some of these we've touched on already, but this is a little different variation. So only testing with test data on the technical side, that's a miss, right? So a lot of times you're building these migrations in lower environments, you're testing them in lower environments. That's fine. You just don't want your first migration of production data to be the actual go live weekend, right, where you're trying to move things over to the new system. A lot of times data differences and what really happens in the real production system is going to be different. Is going to be more complex than what you have in your lower test and development environment. So make sure that you're running tests with actual production data when you're doing the migrations to make sure that you've covered most of those variations and are not caught by surprise. Poor integration planning. So this one, there's a couple of ways this could go sideways. For one, there's been plenty of times where we are surprised to find out there was a never before mentioned stored procedure, that's generating an email or something that's getting sent out to users on Monday. And after they get migrated to the new system, they get a bunch of alerts, about records that haven't been updated or something. And it's because it's tied to the old system. Or similar, some other kind of forgotten system that's been doing some critical calculation and update to the records that was never discussed or brought up. And it doesn't exist on the new system now, and we have to scramble to make sure that we can get things updated without impacting users too much. So really, it's being thorough on any kind of automation or integration that's happening there, and making sure that we've got a story for it in the new platform. API throttling, that's another one where it's like if you do small segments and small test runs of migrations, you feel good, you've got the timing, and it's pretty linear usually, right? What can blow up that linear timing is if you've got API throttling. So a lot of cloud-based platforms today, as you start pumping them full of data and loading them, you'll start to hit some of the API limits, and it's going to start slowing things down if it doesn't outright throw errors. So being aware of that API throttling, Microsoft, there's different options there to work with support and get that API throttling increased over like a migration weekend or something. Those are all things that you just want to, again, not be caught flat-footed and be surprised during a go-live window. And then over-dependent on a single person. This is, there's probably somebody on the team that is the guru of whatever tool you have selected, and it's going to be the one that's doing all of the transformation mapping and things like that, and they've probably run it 1,000 times. But if that person goes down, they get the flu the weekend that you're doing the migration, you want to have backup plans, right? You don't want a whole organization basically to have to wait. Because one person is unavailable or loses internet or something like that. So try to lean on cloud-based platforms to do these migrations, and try to have more than one person capable of monitoring and kicking them off or restarting them as need be.
And I will fly through this slide because we're short on time here. But so I've already kind of touched on this, but to me, it's incredibly important, before you start migrating, determine what basically, the minimum lovable product would be. So list everything out that you want to accomplish, figure out some prioritization framework, use whatever, it doesn't have to be anything super sophisticated, but hit on the high value, low cost. Those are no brainers, right? Make tough decisions, where it becomes harder to make, right? Where the value and cost are, become a little more misaligned. But, prioritize things, publish a roadmap, let users know it's a living system. It likely won't be perfect on day one, right? Plan for maybe a fast follow to address some low hanging fruit. And lastly, make sure people know we'll make it better over time. This isn't it. We'll make it better over time. People tend to adopt better when they know, hey, this isn't it. And if, you should be thinking about this as a living, breathing thing, just like most cloud-based software these days.
All right, two slides left, I think. So tool selection is a key thing. And I guess my advice here is when you're looking at tool selection, your migration project does not have to pick one of these tools, right? You can land on different things, different tools for different jobs. So here, working left to right, on the low code side, Power Automate or CSV import export, those are things that can be great for configuration tables, right? Like if you've got a list of the zip codes in the US out there, and that needs to come over as part of your configuration data, like bring that over with the simplest tool, right? That doesn't need to be a big ETL job like from the next column. The ETL tools are great for giant batches. They can have good logging capability. They help us like predict performance. They usually have ways to kind of scale out on like multi-threading and things and going in parallel. And it's a skill set that you might have people on house that can help accelerate that, right? If they're already capable on these tools, they can take big chunks of that migration as well. Some things might require more shaping. We've got some capabilities that we look to pro code more for. The Sprout Toolkit is a plug for us. It's an open source framework out there that's available via NuGet package and a .NET Core solution. So that's a library that basically is very good at writing to Dataverse, and it is good at determining that it doesn't need to do an update. Basically, it looks at the source record, looks at the destination. If it's already migrated that row in the past, it compares column by column to see what's there, and it will skip any rows that don't actually require an update, which increases the throughput by a lot, right? If you can skip an update, it's a lot faster. And then if you take all of these things and you find yourself doing the same kind of migration again and again, which is something that we have done, you can lean for very customized tools. We've built something called Uproot, which, Ariel, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Yeah, the Uproot is specifically meant to migrate from Salesforce to Dynamics. We've built it in a way that it can take other platforms in the future, maybe HubSpot, things like that. You can picture other sources and bring them over to Dynamics quickly. This is a great solution because even if you're not doing a full lift and shift to Dynamics, there's probably, even on a modernization project, 70% of it might be lift and shift, and then you can reimagine the other 30%, right? So this is something we've built. It's a web app. It's got a front end. It's very functional consultant friendly, I would say, to go through and do the data mapping from Salesforce to Dynamics. This is the only elevator pitch part of the presentation, but wanted to mention that this is where you can lead with some of the migrations are these very specialized tools.
Thank you, Brendan and Corey. So with that, we know we're right at time. Well done, gentlemen. But Q&A is open if anyone has any questions. And while we give people a minute to submit their questions, I know one of the most common questions we get around migrations is, how long does this take? And so you just talked, Corey, about how a tool like Uproot can minimize migration time, but from both of your perspectives, kind of what factors go into determining how long a migration like this takes? And yeah, what's your perspective on length of time?
You want to take it, Corey? You want me to take it?
You take first crack. I'm still catching my breath from the last two slides.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I generally tell people sight unseen, these projects tend to take somewhere between 4 and 7 months. But generally, the biggest dependency in terms of timeline is customers' availability. So quite often, people have full-time jobs and they're kind of working this as the second part of their job. So it becomes a slower process than we'd like because, real work, the core work gets in the way type of thing, right? But I've seen it happen as quickly as 30 days. We have a case study where we migrated somebody off Salesforce in about 35 days. That's a little bit more chaotic than I'd recommend, but certainly can be done. I've also seen projects that, multi-year, because we're rolling out different countries, over different time periods and things like that. So, but I generally tell people for, I'd say a normal size project, somewhere in the 4 to 7 month range. You tell people the same, Corey? I don't know.
Yes, I was going to say a lot of it depends. Again, like the questions I asked to kind of help scope that are, I'm trying to get a feel of like order of magnitude, like how much data, how deep is it, how wide is it, right? Like how many tables, how many rows, how many integrations need to be updated, how many users are there? Like they're all the factors. Most of them probably fall in that range. I would say like I've seen them extend beyond a year, but that's really rare. I remember those are like milestones of my career kind of thing. Others have been, they're in that 3 to 4 month range too. So both ends of that scale.
Thank you both. Okay, we have another question. We have our first one here. So what's the biggest mistake you've seen people make with these types of projects?
It's like we've talked about so many already. I know I'm trying to figure out like
well, maybe it's one of them. Maybe it's one of those things that stands out in the common pitfalls.
I think I have seen like IT teams lead a migration where they don't get the buy-in right and they don't get the business side, and maybe they are technically executed well and they have a mirror image of the system that they had before in this new platform, but nobody wants to use it and all the problems they had are just on a new platform now. So.
Yeah, I think sometimes like, an IT team could deliver on paper absolute gold, but if like the change management stuff hasn't happened, if users weren't involved, right, if they haven't been kind of shown the vision and why this is going to be awesome, it could fail. And I think the opposite is true. And I don't recommend this, but I think, if you're working collaboratively, you can deliver less than gold and have a successful project, right? Like that's how important it is from my perspective.
Answers. Okay, one more. How do you scope a project like this?
It's kind of tied to the estimate answer, right? Like it's kind of I mean, I think it goes back, not just the technical stuff that I did to scope it, right? But it's back to Brendan's point about what's the measures of success, right? Like, are we trying to remove technical debt? Are we trying to improve the system? What was not working before is probably like how you start with that and then figure out, what does success look like?
That's kind of what I was going to say is, the approach we tend to take is some version of show me what you do today. Tell me what you like about it, what you hate about it. We're not going to recreate what you do today. So get over that, right? We just need to understand the current state. And then let's talk about what does an ideal future state look like, right? And then laying all of that out, we use kind of an a la carte menu. Say, okay, here's everything we heard or what we didn't hear, but we think is important. And work with them on picking kind of, all right, what are we going to focus on? What's that minimum level product type thing?